That's the Kensingtons on 4ZZZ 102.1 FM, and a track lifted from their EP. The Ground came up to meet us, and the EP is called Black Tag Parade. In the studio, I am joined by a member from leading member and founder of the Kensingtons, Stuart Tudor Jackman, and also Colin Bushell, who introduced me to Stuart. And Colin has been a past guest who takes photographs for the magazine, which you can get at West End, called the West End Magazine. And good morning, both of you. How are you?
Good, yourself?
Oh, hang on. Wait a minute. Try that again.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
We've been testing our microphones here, and I had you on blank, and that just defeats the purpose.
It does.
So you want to move into a house of chickens, do you, Stuart?
I'm just intrigued by a house with chickens. I like the fact they've put that forward as a selling point. I think that's great.
It got you talking.
Yeah, well, I'm intrigued already.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Coming up from England, were there a lot of chickens in the suburban areas of
Not in the
England?
suburbs. No, not in the suburbs. Rarely are they seen as a selling point, but over here they are, and that's fabulous. I think that's great.
We're becoming self-sustainable here in Australia. Well, we're hoping we would as well. And Colin, thanks for bringing Stuart as well, because you have a very close English connection as well.
Yes, indeed. Yes, it's all to do with the origins. Yes, we're both from England originally, so been here for some time though.
You both have English accents.
They're hard to get away from.
Well, easier to do. I'm actually learning, trying to put an English accent, but I have to find a dialect or which region would be the best thing. I can join you three, or two.
You could.
The third one.
The other thing you need to learn, as you said earlier on, is you need to take an umbrella with you everywhere.
Yes, you had an English umbrella with you, and you did it in the most English way underneath the arm.
That's the only way to hold an umbrella, Q.
Oh, is it? Rather than hitting someone over the head with it?
Even when it's raining, it's best not to actually put it up. Just hold it sort of stylishly under your arm.
That's why they have the bowler hat.
That's correct.
Yeah, nothing as ghastly as to actually open the thing up.
Heaven forbid you don't want to get it wet.
No.
But you moved to Australia. Why?
Well, strangely enough, the weather.
Oh, funny enough.
Yeah, I've been here about 14 years, something like that. And, I can't get tired of the weather, even in a week like this. Love it.
Even if it's just this, you're dripping with sweat and everyone wants to stay away from you.
It's beautiful.
Oh, that's one way to be lonely. But you were part, can I say the Kensingtons, which we've never heard of, I've never heard of. I'm sure there's probably some Australians who might. Part of the Britpop era?
Probably a little smidge before that. So
1989 onwards a little bit.
Yeah, basically. So it started off in 88, 89, while I was still over in the UK. And to start off with, it was just me and one other person back in my hometown of Taunton, which is in Somerset, which is sort of near Glastonbury and that kind of Bristol, that kind of area.
Yeah.
And we started putting a few songs together and got contacted by a little record label that we'd done some work for in the past. And the first thing they said to us is we've got 2 weeks to put together an EP about the privatisation of the rail tracks in the UK. And they said, can you put a song together to protest against the privatisation of the rail tracks in 2 weeks? So I said, okay, let's give it a go. And didn't really know what to protest about, so all I did is write a song that listed a lot of train stations in the UK, and it seemed to work. So that's kind of how we started off, just putting that song together on this EP.
Did you have to do the cliche train rhythm to the song as well?
Very much so. It's the law.
Is it the law?
And it also has the appropriate woo-woo noises from a train at the beginning. Yeah.
I guess that stirs up people's emotions, having to put the rule in. I guess it wouldn't be a train song without it. I mean, if you did a car song, how do you do that? Or a bike song?
I don't know. I guess you'd have a little bit of a ding-ding, wouldn't you, if you were a bike song? But I'm not sure
honk honk.
Honk honk.
Yeah, a bit of a honk honk, I think is the way to go.
Yeah. And if you're doing a horse song, you just do a gallopy kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So that kicked off the music as the Kensingtons. And that's with Andy Howlett.
Yeah, so he's a friend of mine who's still over in the UK. So basically when I left Somerset where we were, I left there in about 95. We've been apart all that time, and we got back together again musically in probably 2009, I think, when I was contacted by an American record label who discovered some of our old stuff and wanted to release some of it. So I got in touch with Andy again and said, do you fancy putting some stuff together? And so that's what we've done for the last 4 or 5 years now. So he's in Bristol in the UK, I'm over here, and between us we kind of scrape through and get it done.
You did this in the best of technology in the decade gone by. It would have been very hard to do that since you've been here since 95. It would have been hard to do. I mean, you could do it, but it would be harder because technology wasn't for what it is now to record and try and transverse information instantaneously.
That's it. So to be honest, for the first few years I was over here, it was really just me recording it all. And so everything you would hear on some of the older stuff is just me. It's me playing everything. The more recent EPs, including that one you just played a song from there, that's genuinely a collaborative thing. So as you know, as you said, these days you can share files across 12,000 miles. It doesn't make any difference. So I would record everything here, send it straight over to Andy, who'd muck around with it, weave whatever magic he does. I don't understand.
Now, Colin, you, I guess obviously you're friends with Stuart. Did you know each other in England? Or did you find he was here in Australia by surprise?
Yeah, basically, it's a funny story. I was hosting trivia nights in the early 2000s at Roses in Edward Street in the city, and Stuart and his wife Wendy came along as participants, and basically we got chatting. The English connection obviously gets you chatting. Turns out, where are you living? I'm living here. You're living here. We lived right next door to one another.
In Australia?
In Australia, yeah. So we ended up literally seeing each other quite regularly, same interest in sort of bands and music and that sort of thing. So, yeah, it's kind of, kept on the friendship for all these years. It's about 10 years or so now. So, yeah, it's been great.
So go on.
No, I was going to say, I think it's fair to say nothing brings people together quite like trivia.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I keep forgetting there's a trivia night at the new venue in Ann Street, which is, where are you? It'll come back to me. Soul Natural Foods. They do trivia nights on Thursday. I keep forgetting it's on.
There we go.
That must be said, a natural food store is not the sort of place I'd expect to find a trivia night, but I'm sure it'd be tremendous.
Oh, it's a home for me. But for you, Colin, to find out he was in the Kensingtons, were you absolutely surprised and blown away that Stuart was living here?
Yeah, well, there was no real sort of immediate indication that and I'd never heard of the Kensingtons either, to be honest. My sort of musical interest was probably down a different path, but subsequently, obviously, finding that out was really interesting. The story, particularly the way, Stuart has kept it going across the divide, from one side of the world to the other, and the fact that there's some amazing stories, anecdotal stories, and, what they've done. It was just a tremendous sort of piece when I was thinking about, a West End magazine article. So, so it's what I've discovered is that, like most rock and roll stories, there's some great stories in there.
What about the era you left? Because you left in 95, and that's what close to the height of the Britpop, if we can call it. Some people probably hate that term, even bands probably hate, but there's no other term you can call it.
No, that's what it was, yeah.
What it is. Do you feel you missed out on, being competing to the other ones, or even just joining in, just saying you were at that height of that era?
Not really, because I think, realistically, the style of music we were playing anyway, it's very, to be honest, it is very 80s and early 90s sounding indie pop. It's not necessarily, sort of welded onto that kind of Britpop style. And I think when I gave up doing this kind of thing at that time and moved away, I kind of lost interest in listening to music for a few years anyway. So to be honest, it was a natural thing for me. I sort of drew a little bit of a line. Let's leave Menswear and Sleeper and all these other people to it, and got on with something else for a little while. So no, I don't feel I missed out at all. And there, there was some great stuff happening over here, as there has been for the last 15, 20 years. So
well, the thing is that coming to Australia, it would have been leaving the band behind and just being by yourself. Other than the weather, it would have been a scary time for you, though, too, because it's the uncertainties of what you're going to do here.
Yeah, it is a bit strange, and many of us have done it, and obviously many people have gone the other way to the UK as well. But it was a bit freaky to sell up everything in the UK and then come over here with a suitcase each, and that's pretty much it. That's what we did. And
I think it's interesting, actually, from a music point of view as well. Like, I come over in '98, and I think for a lot of English people coming to Australia, that there's a whole new music scene to discover, because not many Australian bands made the sort of successful commercial journey to the UK. So, if people talk of Australia, they talked about AC/DC, In Excess, Kylie Minogue. That was it. Bands like Icehouse had one-hit wonders. No one knew who Cold Chisel was. People didn't know about Skyhooks, didn't know about the Angels. They just didn't know these bands because they never got the commercial airplay in the UK. So when we arrived, it was actually really exciting, I think, to sort of suddenly realise there was this whole sort of generation, 2 or 3 generations of Australian music, which you'd yet to discover.
You saw the alternative side too. It was very big in the 90s, a local scene as well. We had very good bands come out from Brisbane, because you'd probably hit the right spot at the time with, nationally, of course, but also a lot of bands that come out from different states, Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland, and particularly Queensland, you've, Regurgitated, then you got your Scream Theatre, who, and the Powderfinger, and all of this was just booming in Australia. Any of that leaked out into the overseas market that you probably can hear from your compatriots in England saying, hey, this is this band from Brisbane, can you check them out for me? Or is it just still quiet?
I think most of it was pretty quiet, but certainly from my style of music, the one band from Australia or Brisbane that definitely resonated the most with the people I sort of know in the UK was, and it wouldn't surprise you, it's the Go-Betweens. They were the far and away the biggest thing, and they're still revered over in the UK by sort of indie pop fans. It's enormous. Absolutely enormous. But many of the other bands maybe still didn't quite make it. The Locksmiths made it pretty big in the UK, relatively speaking. They're I know they haven't been around for a few years now, but the Locksmiths, and even to a smaller degree, bands like the Zebras, who still plodding away, and they've got their own little niche market over there.
What about one band in particular that comes into my mind also, forgot to mention, was Custard, because they just have this, I mean, it sort of gives you that reaction when you hear the word. It's just like your eyes lit up.
Well, I only discovered them since coming over here, and it was a real education a couple of years ago, or a few years ago, whenever it was, to read Pig City, the book. So to get me up to speed on everything that I'd missed in the Brisbane music scene, and Custard play a pretty big part in that story, don't they?
Yeah.
And I remember when I first came over here, actually, I put an advert in whatever it was at the time, Time Off or Rave or whatever it is, I can't remember. One of those things, trying to get together with some new musicians, and one of the guys that called me up was a guy who used to drum in Custard, I think. So that's how I first actually came across them.
I can't think of the name now. McLennan's. Oh God.
Stand by.
Come back to that one.
We'll come back. We got some thinking music while we're here. We're trying to figure out who was the drummer. It's in the top of my head.
Yeah.
We're going to play the title track from the Kensingtons EP. This is the Black Tag Parade, which is what we're going to play for you right now on Full Triple Z.
Do it.
On 4ZZZ 102.1 FM, I am joined by the Kensingtons, Stuart and Tudor Jackman. There's the title track from their EP called Black Tag Parade. And Colin and Stuart, we just got a caller off air. Thanks, Joe, for your call too. Regarding he had mentioned punk rock fans came to Brisbane from England because of the Saints and their contribution to the scene and how it made an impact over in England.
Absolutely, and as I was just saying, I think it's pretty acknowledged by bands such as The Damned and some of the real old school punk rock bands that punk pretty much originated with the Saints in Brisbane. That was the start of it all. It was, it wasn't Malcolm McLaren or the Pistols or any of the traditional stuff. It definitely was the Saints, according to them.
And that's one of the few Australian bands again who made that sort of transition into sort of the English sort of sound as well. So if you look at punk compilations from the mid to late 70s, you had the Buzzcocks and the Pistols and those sort of things, and basically the Saints are always on them. Yeah,
it's interesting you two just magnifying Australia and Brisbane from an English perspective. It makes you think, why is it that we didn't achieve the greatness as the English bands would in Australia, which we found, there's so many of them. We know English bands more than Australia knows the Australian bands.
I suppose a lot of it is it's all about opportunity for a start, isn't it? I mean, for bands a few years ago, trying to get over to the UK and do something would have been a struggle anyway. Mm-hmm. But also, if you look at the UK market, just like the American market, it's already so saturated with millions and millions and millions of bands. Is there really room for another one to come in? Whereas Australia isn't necessarily saturated, so it's easy to absorb bands from the UK or the US, and it's kind of harder to protect your own stuff.
And certainly with a lot of Australians living in London, I know bands like, as I say, Jimmy Barnes used to play regularly in London. Powderfinger came and sold out in Shepherd's Bush. The bands were coming over, and most of the crowd though were Australians going to see the bands they knew from back home. So commercially, it was difficult for them to break into top of the pops or the charts and those sort of things at the time.
I think it's always disappointing that the band that did really make it, this is a personal opinion, was Crowded House. Should have kept them. That's my view. But anyway, there we go.
Okay, that's all right. Each to their own. I'm not arguing with this one. We're just getting our hands dirty on the local and the stuff that's not being sort of promoted. And that's the thing. We need to enrich, and you're actually putting the spotlight on Australian music here from an English perspective, because we need to keep embracing our local bands here and encourage them to go overseas and
absolutely
and stuff like that.
In support of that as well, actually, for another one of the West End Group magazines, which is Indulge. I did a piece recently on the Triffid, in Newstead. Interviewed JC from Powderfinger, and basically, it's an amazing venue, and they're really into promoting that kind of Australian music scene. It's a place for musicians, by musicians, and a lot of Australian bands, Brisbane bands, are getting a good sort of exposure in there. So that's definitely something to keep in mind.
And even that record label of that song you've been playing just now, that's Dufflecoat Records in the UK, and they on their roster there's 4 or 5 other Australian bands. So they're from Cambridge in the UK, but Fig Newleys have released stuff on them. The Zebras are actually releasing something early next year as well on good. Dufflecoat Records. So because it's so global now, Australian music's getting a big listen out there.
Well, I had the Pretty Fingers in last week, and one of their tracks, I was just trying to think what it was now, but anyway, it made it on the Philadelphia radio, and I mean, now you can actually, get your stuff submitted to anywhere in the world due to technology, which we were talking about before. So it actually encapsulates that there is hope for local bands, as small as they are, to get out there.
Well, we get played in New York and Indonesia, strangely enough, more than anywhere else.
Indonesia's
I'm not quite sure what the connection is between those two markets, with me never having been to either, but we seem to get a reasonable amount of airplay in those two markets. So you could be anywhere.
Right. Well, we don't have much time now to continue. It's an interesting talk for this one, Stuart. So thanks for joining me.
My pleasure.
You too,
Thank
Colin,
you.
for bringing Stuart and for your input as well.
You're welcome.
And giving us the reflection of Australian music from your perspective, which is interesting. And just the Kensingtons, you're going to have the other two members, which is Andy Howlett and Adam Discom, come over sometime?
No, what I'm actually doing now is they're firmly over in the UK, so I'm now actually putting together an Australian version of it.
Yeah.
So we've only had a couple of rehearsals so far, but I've got a few musicians together. We rehearse down in West End,
Yeah.
and hopefully in the new year we'll start playing some of this stuff live in Australia.
Speaking of which, we found out the ex-drummer from Custard who you
Yes.
called up. Danny Plant, wasn't it?
That was the man.
Danny Plant,
Yep.
okay. Colin and Stuart, thanks for joining me on Full Triple Z News is coming up in a second, and we're going to play one more track from your EP. What do you want? Track number what?
Let's go for track number 5.
Number 5. Any language involved with this one? Rude words?
Only
Just-
the loveliest language imaginable, that's all. No swear words.
Okay, just in case. What is going on here? News is coming up. In the meantime, you guys want to keep chatting? I'll change it to CD players. So, the other thing too, when's your first gig for the Kensingtons in Australian version?
When will it be?
Yeah.
The first gig, I would like to think the speed we're going at the moment, sometime maybe February, March. That's what we'll try and aim for.
Okay.
We'll see how we go.
We'll keep you in the loop, Q, so you're aware of what's going on.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you very much.